How we doing? How we doing? Another episode of Kicking It with the Belt Guy, aka Zain. It's me, Zain. There's the lovely Belt, and today we have a very special guest who can talk Giants probably endlessly as they have throughout their career. But also, we want to get to know who they are as an individual. So rather than listen to me talk about it, let's just go ahead and bring John on. You might know John from Giants Wire as well as USA Today. Let's go ahead and bring him on. Hey, John, how you doing today?
Very good, Zane. It's good to be here.
Yeah, appreciate having you and just appreciate you taking out the time to come on. Um, how's your day going? It's a Wednesday. How's your Wednesday?
We were very busy today, naturally, with the roster cuts and I guess the practice squad, which ended up being a real nothing burger because they signed back most of the players that they cut. So,
Yeah, nothing I would say shocking or amazing. But since we're on the topic, let's just deep dive right into it. Well, what did you think between the actual 53 cut down before the practice squad additions and now afterwards? What were your thoughts?
well, I was kind of concerned about a couple of positions, offensive line depth. Always, what I saw in the preseason was a lot of mixing and matching and not a lot of continuity. But we weren't expecting that anyway, but I didn't see enough continuity. The five guys that are going to play enough snaps together to really get comfortable with it.
Sure.
And plus, the cornerback situation, the secondary, it's just too many. It's just too much flux right now. You get a little nervous because when you play a team like Philadelphia, they're coming back with the same team they came back. They had last year. Giants are coming back with a lot of new faces. You just don't know how that's going to work.
So you brought this up. Brian Daboll's doing this whole guard rotation scenario. We saw previously Joe Judge did the guard rotation scenario. This is now the second Giants head coach with Patriot ties doing this whole guard scenario.
Yeah.
What do you make of this?
Well, it's about having the right guys, and it's pretty obvious they don't have the right guys. Glowinski's like a stopgap, and the other guys are inexperienced. They don't really like Lemieux as a starter. They like to have him, I guess, on the roster. It's a security, for depth, but they don't really want to see him as a starter. And Azudu and McKethan, two guys that have just unproven. McKethan hasn't played it down. I mean, we don't even know what he can do.
All right, he tore his ACL last FanFest, or what FanFest used to be. It was a different variation today. And with Azudu, he had the neck injury. We never heard about it. At least nothing media-wise leaked. Nobody understood what happened to him. We heard nothing about surgery. We heard nothing about recovery. All we heard was neck injury. He got shut down. Doesn't hit pup. Comes back. What happened with Azudu exactly?
Well, I know about as much about it as you guys do. He's healthy now. Brian Dable doesn't really talk about injuries in depth. He gets that, I guess, from Bill Belichick, but he doesn't like to talk about injuries. He'll tell you a guy's got a leg, he's got a back, he's got a neck, or whatever, but he won't get into it. And with Azudu, he just kind of skated around the whole thing. All we know is that he's back. He passed his physical, coming into camp, and he's ready to go.
Is it concerning, or is it okay that a third round pick who is expected to be starting can't seem to get a starting job? Can't seem to beat out Bredesen. Presumably, he is the left guard Azudu, at least. I know he got snaps at right guard, but that's probably not why they drafted him. But is it somewhat concerning, or is it lingering because of the injury scenario?
No, I don't think he's gotten enough practice time.
Sure.
And, he doesn't have a natural position. In college, he played everywhere. He played center, he played guard, he played tackle, sometimes in the same game. He played all those positions. So for him to settle in at left guard, to tell you the truth right now, Bredesen has more experience, so I guess he'll start the season there. But, by the time the season ends, you're going to see a different lineup, I think.
Sure. What do you make of, I should say, Glowinski? Obviously, he was the only free agent because the cash was strapped and there had to be some type of movement. He's pretty much what everyone thought he was going to be. A little bit worse in pass pro than I expected. I thought he would be slightly a little bit better. Fine as a road grader, does well in the run game. but overall, it was a complete not too pretty.
Well, last year was kind of I guess it was an anomaly because they had Feliciano playing center, and he really isn't a center either. So now you have three guys in the middle of your line, all playing kind of out of sync, out of position, new to each other. So we got to write that off. With Schmitz at center now, I think they'll have a little bit more stability, and I think Lewinsky will play a little bit better. Hopefully, he'll be able to pass pro a little better, but we'll see. We'll see. We'll see when they play Dallas and Philadelphia. Those are the measuring sticks.
Yeah, and we'll find out week one immediately, right? First game, you're going to find out very, very quickly what's about to happen. Okay. So you have a wealth of obviously experience within the industry, within covering the team. You've been doing it for 20 plus years. Tell me a little bit about you. How does John even get to this standpoint? Give us a little bit of your journey. Where'd you grow up? Did you actually grow up a Giants fan?
Oh
Did
yeah,
you, yeah. So tell us a little bit about your story.
I grew up in Queens in the '60s and '70s, and I was a Giants fan. My first game I went to was at Yankee Stadium, 1967. The Giants played the Saints. The Saints were actually an expansion team that year, and I believe the Giants won the game, but wasn't an easy one. They weren't a very good team back then. So, and then I had season tickets. Then they moved to the Meadowlands and so forth. But I worked down in the financial district for 25 years, and then when I left that, I got a degree in journalism, and then I worked for NBC and SNY, and they signed me to the Giants. I ran their Giants page for 12 years, and then I worked for a whole bunch of other outfits,
Sure.
independent. Elite Sports was one. Fansided hired me for a while. I worked with them. There's a few others also. Comcast, and then I decided to retire or semi-retire, and then Dan called me in and said, "Hey, would you like to write for Giants Wire?" I said, "Sure." So I'm out of retirement for my friend Dan Benton.
Amazing. Are you still local in the area? Are you still in the New York, New Jersey
Yeah, I
tri-state?
live on Long Island now. Yeah, I don't.
Okay. How long have you been there?
Couple of years, 4 or 5
Okay.
years. Yeah.
And that's directly from Queens? Did you stay kind of in Queens or did you move around a little bit?
No, I've always lived in Queens, and I moved to Long Island a couple of years ago. Yeah.
Okay. So you grew up in what would be considered some of the dark days or the dark ages, right?
The,
You've been able
wil-
to
the wilderness years.
the wilderness years, that's even better. So you have the best comparison because you lived through it, right? You got the 70s and you got this past stretch of a little bit of a decade plus with the Giants post the fourth Lombardi. Which one was worse and why?
Which is worse and why? You
Yeah.
mean which losing stretch?
Yeah. What was worse, the 70s or the
Oh, the
2010s?
most recent one is worse because the NFL is a completely different animal now.
Hmm.
Back in the days in the '60s and '70s, or after the merger, really, that's when you should really count when the NFL and the AFL merged in 1970. Um, you only had one way to improve your team, and that's the draft. That was it. If you drafted poorly, you were a bad team. And you ended up trading draft picks for veterans, and you get on this hamster wheel. It's just, a cycle of death. And that's what the Giants were on. They had so many poor drafts that just couldn't get out of their own way. 18 years. They were horrible. So this stretch coming in, you have so many different avenues to improve your team, and they couldn't do it. The most seasons you should lose in modern day NFL is 3. If you can't have a winning season that fourth year, you're doing it wrong.
Hmm.
You learned that from the Raiders when Al Davis was in his final days. He just kept drafting wide receivers and other terrible first round picks. And this was what the Giants were doing. Although now we know the Giants' first round picks under Dave Gettleman panned out, but really none of the rest of those drafts were terrible.
Yeah.
Those guys aren't in the league anymore.
Right.
The first round guys are still here. Everybody else is gone. So that's why this time around it was bad.
What happened with the Jerry Reese era? Started off with such a bang, right?
Mhm.
His initial draft class is probably his not even probably it is his best draft class. But
Mhm.
everything after that, just like you said about Dave Gettleman, right? First rounders hits. After that, it's all more or less misses, minus a couple injuries that were second rounders. Terrell Thomas, things you can't control. A Kenny Phillips, even though he's a first rounder. What happened with Jerry Reese in the same kind of way that kind of just led to nothing but misses?
Well, I mean, you just hit on a couple of guys and you forgot David Wilson. There was a lot of high picks that got hurt.
Yep.
So that's bad luck right there. I mean, you can't predict that. But it's about prioritizing positions. When you look at the draft, when you're drafting what I call players that you can get in any other round, you always draft a unique guy, the 6'7", 320 guy with nimble feet. There's only one of those guys. If he's there, you got to take him. Even if you already have one, take another one. You can get wide receivers, cornerbacks. You know how many guys between are 5'9" to 6 foot, between 175 and 210 pounds in this country? There's got to be 20,000 of them that can run a 4.40 too.
Yep.
So why don't you take the unique guy? He never did that. He kept taking the best available athlete. And it just backfired. I mean, you still see guys like that. David Wilson, he got hurt. Terrell Thomas, good player, but he also got hurt.
Yep.
So, they needed to draft offensive linemen, defensive linemen. When George Young came here in 1979, the first thing he did was build up the lines. And when Bill Parcells took over, he had a famous line. He says, if you don't have the big asses in the trenches, you're not going to win. And Tom Coughlin said the same thing years later. And Jerry Reese didn't do that.
So Jerry Reese went and he drafts Eric Flowers. Justin Pugh was a part of it. What were you expecting the Eric Flowers pick? And if you had to put something to why he picked that pick, what went behind that aside from my guy wasn't available because somebody else took him and now I just got to take something?
Well, the two picks that I think they were back to back too. Eric Flowers, Eli Apple. Okay. They tried to trade out of the Apple pick. They couldn't, so they ended up taking Apple. They should have been able to swing a deal there. There was really no player. It was kind of a weird range. There really wasn't a great player there that they wanted. So they ended up taking Apple. He was so immature. He no business being in the NFL.
Right.
Flowers was only 19 when they drafted him. He did not have an agent. His father was his agent. He wasn't ready for the NFL. He needed to stay in college another year. That's what an agent would have told him to do. And there's no way he should have been a top 10 pick. I mean, the guy ended up being a decent NFL lineman, right? Played
As a
about
guard.
a
Yep.
decade or whatever.
As a guard. Yep.
As a guard, right. But, it took him 4 teams before he caught on, and maybe 3 or 4 years. He wasn't ready for the NFL, and yet the Giants, the vetting process wasn't what it is now. Their pro personnel and their scouting department is just so much bigger and better now.
Sure.
They don't listen to the Mark Rosses of the world.
Yeah. He's been
He was one of the guys that gave Jerry Reese a lot of bad advice, I think.
Yeah. So when you go into that war room or you go into that area where all these different people are talking, was for Jerry Reese, and again, this is just whatever information you do or don't know. And Jerry Reese, was Mark Ross the main guy in his ear? Was that the one?
He was one of them. I wouldn't say he was one of the main guys. It was a few.
Sure. That was just leading him astray.
Yeah, just taking these explosive athletes. The game is football. I mean, and team building. Are you building a team? He would take guys like Odell Beckham Jr. As we know, he's a great player. But
Sure.
did the Giants win any more games with Odell Beckham Jr.? No. And he turned out, look at the first couple of years, he was a mess. He was having fits on the sideline, and Tom Coughlin didn't even know what to do with him. Kid was like a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
So, that's one of the picks that, if they had to do it again, I don't think they would do it.
Fair enough.
This group wouldn't have picked him.
Sure. Speaking of Tom Coughlin, he retires from the Giants. What did you make of that whole scenario, especially the walk-off completely ignores Mara? I mean, that seems like a pretty dark day for the Giants considering how much Coughlin has succeeded with the organization?
It was handled awfully. I mean, they did a terrible job with that. He was pushed out. You know, the team was not doing well. The roster was old. It was horrible. The drafts weren't good. The free agent signings were backfiring. And Coughlin, let's face it, he was not Coughlin anymore. He wasn't really the coach that he had been in the past. Um, so it was time for him to go. He should have actually made a deal with them and just stepped down. But he said it in his farewell speech that he still wanted to coach.
Right.
So he kind of tipped his hand, and that's when everybody in the audience was like, "Oh, well, he's getting forced out."
Right.
The Giants, the ownership just couldn't recover from that. Ben McAdoo is not a head coach. So we already knew that he wasn't going to succeed. It's a bad time.
How image conscious or self conscious is John Mara as an owner?
Oh, not at all. I mean, he's he's a kind of a laid back guy. From what I know of him, he's a classy guy. Very low profile. He tries to stay out of it. Unfortunately, he can't because it's the family business, and he ends up meddling without really trying to meddle. But now I think all of that's straightened out.
Okay. This new regime comes in, right? The Gettleman era finally comes to a long overdue close because it was ugly from start to finish. I don't think there's a good moment in there that really sticks out for me that I can think of and be like, oh, look, this is great. I don't know what the side, the silver lining is here other than it got us to this stage with this regime. That's probably, I guess, all you can say. When it was bad, right? What was the worst moment? First off, how did you feel about the Dave Gettleman hiring? I was completely against it, as a lot of people were. But how did you feel about the hiring? How did you feel about his tenure? And why did it take so long to end that whole journey?
Wow. Again, when John Mara and Steve Tisch took over the team from their fathers who had passed away, I don't think they were really, even though they should have been ready for it, they really weren't ready for it. And they didn't know modern day NFL. They didn't know who were the cutting edge guys. They were listening to the wrong people. They ended up hiring the dinosaur Gettleman, who had, if you were listening to the players around the league who had played under him, they all hated him. He cut them without telling them, and he just wasn't a classy guy when it came to stuff like that. He had a lot of rough edges, and you have to embrace technology. And here's a guy walking around with a binder with names in it. I mean, that's not how it works anymore. If you look at the Giants' war room, everything's electronic, and they have databases upon databases. Every player who has a heartbeat right now is in there. So, they know when a guy gets cut, that's a guy we wanted back then. Let's take a look. Gettleman would have to open up his binder, and that guy probably wouldn't even be in there. So, he wasn't the guy. And then when he got here, he's hiring coaches that, you really need to hire. If you're in New York, you've got to hire a guy who's coached. I've been a head coach in several other places, maybe even college. Not an assistant, not a hot, coordinator. You need to have a guy like when they brought Tom Coughlin in. That was Ernie Accorsi, right? He did that. You can't bring the coordinator in. This is New York. You can't do that. Like the Jets did that with Saleh. I don't want to say too much, but I don't think that's going to work out.
Speaking of, what do you make of this whole Aaron Rodgers, Jihad Ward thing just kind of getting blown up a little bit? There's some smack talking taking place between the two.
Yeah.
Hattie didn't like the hit on by Cobb, I should say, and it seems to be blowing up a little bit more. I mean, Hattie was asked about it as well. He didn't like how he was portrayed. How much is this going to linger at all, or be bulletin board material come that game for them?
Well, I don't think it's going to last long. I think it was a Hard Knocks creation. Rogers, knows he's mic'd. You know, Jihad Wood knows he's mic'd. So who knows if they staged it?
Yeah, a little bit of show for the camera, a little bit of a moment,
What it
possibly.
is.
Okay,
Once you get back on the field, you forget all about that stuff.
okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Um, what was your biggest surprise from the 53? I had a couple. One, Darian Beavers getting cut to me was a bit of a
Mm,
surprise, and
yeah.
then Shane Lemieux making the team to me was a bit of a surprise. What were your question mark moves at that time?
Well, you talk about Beavers. There's really no room for him because they have two players, two linebackers that they have to keep, and that's Carter Coughlin and Cam Brown. Because without those two guys, their special teams are garbage. Okay, they need those guys. They just happen to be linebackers. Um, Brown probably won't play a snap on defense now that they have all these guys. But Coughlin is a very good linebacker. He can play outside and inside. So I was glad they kept him. I thought they were going to cut him and keep Beavers. That wouldn't have been the right thing to do. So you can see what happens when you cut these guys, okay, and you can bring them back to the practice squad. All right, you do that. But if you cut a guy you know other teams are going to grab, you've got to hang on to them. Lemieux is a guy like that. Somebody would pick him up. An interior lineman with a little experience, yeah, he's going to get picked up. Look at Jack Harlow. He got picked up by Dallas, right? He's not going to last long on the waiver wire. These guys, there's a lot of need for that. So you have to be careful about who you let go. I was afraid when they let DeVito go that he was going to get picked up, but he didn't. He got through waivers and they signed him back to the practice squad, which I think they told him they were going to do. So he didn't. He may have had offers from other teams to go on their practice squad, but he decided to stay with the Giants, which is good
Right.
because I like him. I think he's going to be a decent player.
Okay. So once you clear waivers, you can sign to any team. Obviously, you're more or less a free agent. Other
Yeah.
teams can go after you. So it is good to get him back. Same thing with Beavers. I'm a personal fan. He's an old school linebacker that I personally like. Right, big guy.
Yes.
He wasn't moving as fluidly as last season. Obviously, very clear from the ACL. I saw him in training camp. He looked a step slow because of that. So absolutely rooting for him, but you can see he's not fully recovered or ready yet. So potentially maybe back on special teams and growth the following year, if that, or the following season, depending on health, right? Health,
He
say,
got beat.
but
He got beat out for the job by McFadden,
yeah,
who's improved. And when they brought Simmons in, that was it. I
yeah.
mean, no more room for him. So
Now, what do you make of O'Shane Ximines?
mm,
I wasn't a fan of the pick. They've had 4+ years. I think this is his fifth year now, right? It'll be his fifth year in the league. He's shown nothing as far as a pass rusher to actually get to the quarterback.
yeah.
When they signed him, I was shocked because nobody else wanted him. And now he's back on the practice squad too. Are they just betting on some traits here? Is it potentially one of those scenarios, or are he just a body?
I think he's just a body who knows their system.
Fair enough.
You notice when he became a free agent, they didn't sign him after this season. No, there was no interest in him.
Right.
So the only interest was them. They signed him back. They said, "Well, let's take this guy back."
Yeah. And it was non-guaranteed. It's not like they spent.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't a big deal. And now he's on the practice squad, and if they find a better guy, they'll let him go. I mean,
Yeah,
he's
and I believe they still have
established
four.
himself.
They still have 4 roster spots open. I think they've done 12 of 16 so far. So potentially some ads.
And they've got one left, I think.
Okay, they
Yeah.
probably got it up to. How did you feel about this year's draft? Did you have any inkling about any specific individuals they were targeting? And how did you feel about the draft overall? Most people's consensus is the first 3 are home runs, and then the rest were also pretty good. How did you feel about it in real time versus thinking about it?
Well, I didn't think that they would need to trade up to get Deontay Banks. I thought Banks was. Some people saw him as a first rounder. He wouldn't have been there when they picked in the second round. So, but the need to trade up the one spot to get him, I don't know why they did that. They must have gotten some intel with Jacksonville. Somebody was going to trade with Jacksonville or something. We'll see if that's worth it. I think the guy who they took in the 6th round, Hawkins, has actually played better and may even be better. He could be the Tariq Woolen of this draft. He could be. I mean, he could be that guy.
Is the Trey Hawkins hype train legitimate to you? Is this for real? And what makes it for real for you?
He has the size and the attributes. You see, that's the thing. When you look at a corner, okay, you look at the size. Can he match up with the bigger receivers? And if he obviously has the speed. So when you get him into camp, it's basically let's get him here and see what he can do. So that's how you pick him out via his attributes. Then you get him in camp. You see what he can do. And when he got to camp, he excelled. Okay, they probably weren't expecting that. They're expecting Banks to be that guy. Banks hasn't done poorly, but I think Hawkins has done better.
What about Eric Gray and Jordan Riley? Now, Jordan Riley was a name most people just went like this when it happened. Like, do you know who that is?
Yeah, I didn't know who he was.
Yeah, and yet he seems to be making plays. How much of this is down to scouting? How much is this down to coaching? What are the different components that are kind of shifting the Giants' way, if you will, from the previous of just missing on guys regardless, even in flashing in camp, all this stuff, to guys who are later making plays that you don't see as much?
Well, the Jordan Riley is all scouting. I mean, no one had him on their radar. He would have gone undrafted if the Giants didn't pick him.
Yep.
But this was, the Giants scouting department, Dennis Hickey, McDonald, all these guys, they saw him. They looked at him, and he's 25. He's not young. He's been around. He's been in several colleges, and he has the body. They looked at the tape. They worked him out. They liked what they saw. They figured, when you bring a guy in, you envision him. What's this guy going to look like in our uniform, and can he play this game, right? And Riley passes all of that. He's a big kid, good against the run, and especially against the run. That's what they need. That's why they drafted him.
This is one of the first off seasons in my memory bank that the Giants don't have any significant injuries that are going to be detrimental to week 1. Knock on wood just yet.
Yeah.
Still going to be
Don't say that too loud.
Yeah. With a fully healthy team here, what is your expectation going forward between year 2 for a lot of these guys, the young guys from last year taking another step forward, hopefully being healthy? What is your expectation as far as talent upgrade and now still competing where no one saw 9 games, but now there's an expectation of something? Where are you in that conversation?
Well, they have such a daunting schedule. And it's not basically who you play; it's when you play them.
Yep.
And when the 3 of the first 4 games at night. The 4th game is in Arizona in the late window, and then during the stretch of the season, towards the end, they play 5 of 6 on the road. So, in Philadelphia late in the year, and if they're banged up, they're not going to win those games. So,
Sure.
That schedule is what I look at. That's the way I look at it.
And how did you feel about it? It's daunting. Where do you see them sitting around, hovering at that 500 mark? Again, this is all things being equal.
I think if they go 9-8, it'll be an accomplishment.
Okay.
Yeah. The key is to win your division games. And Daniel Jones has been very good against Washington. He's 5-1-1. He's 2-3 against Philly. Right, so he's played well against the Eagles at times, but he's 1-6 against Dallas. That's the team they have to beat this year. They have to start beating Dallas. Now, Dallas, as we know, they're a contender, but they're not a Super Bowl contender. You can beat them. Washington beats them. Philly beats them. Other teams beat them.
Sure.
Giants can't beat them. They need to learn how to beat them. As soon as they do that, then I can say, hey, maybe 11 wins, maybe 12 wins. But unless I see them beat Dallas at least once, I'm not gonna have the Giants up there.
How big is that week one game? If we're just being completely honest, right? For everything
Huge.
that's happening for this team, the hype around it, last year's success, the coaching, the influx of talent, Daniel Jones' contract, etc., right? There's narratives for days. How big is that first Sunday night football game, and how detrimental would a loss be there? Not for the inside the building, but for everything else encompassing it.
They need to win that game for a lot of reasons. One, because it's Dallas. Two,
Yep,
it's a division game. And three, the teams that win their first game usually, if you go 0-1, it's not a good. You could recover from that.
sure.
But a lot of teams that go 1-0 go on to win, have winning seasons. So you have that one win out of the way.
Yeah, starting off fast is obviously very, very important for a lot of teams because you're going to hit those bumps and you're going to take those losses, unexpected ones as well. That you're probably like, well, we should probably win here, but it doesn't happen. So that's going to be a massive game. It's at home, and like you said, they have to make everyone a believer now. Beat the team that you seem to struggle to beat. Last year's 22 draft class was just injury haven, right? Everybody except McFadden got hurt.
That's right.
Weeks at a time, some significant, multiple ACLs we can think of. What
Yep.
is your expectation for that class going into year two, and who are your eyes on the most in that whole class?
Well, it was a very good draft, I think, but we didn't really get to see it come to fruition. Wendell Robinson, um, he had a great game, and then he tore his ACL during that game, and he was gone. So I'm looking forward to see him. I think they're probably going to start him off a little slow, but I think he'll be in the offense. I mean, they only have 6 wide receivers, but he'll definitely be a big part of the offense this year. Let's hope he can stay healthy. And the linemen, I got to see Azudu. I want to see McKetton. I want to see these guys get into the game and upgrade that offensive line in the middle. That's going to be a big deal for them.
What's your expectation for year two, Evan Neal? Obviously, not the prettiest of rookie seasons. He had a good stretch. He got hurt, MCL scenario. Post MCL, it was just a bad stretch. I don't know if he had really a good game post MCL. What is your overall thought of his play and your expectation of him in year two?
I want to see if Neil's the kind of guy you got to kind of build his confidence. So they should run behind him and get him to. Well, this is what happens. If you remember Super Bowl 25 when the Giants played Buffalo, Bruce Smith was one of the best pass rushers in the history of the game. The Giants couldn't block him. Jumbo Elliott couldn't really block him. He couldn't pass protect against him. So what they did is they ran at him. And Jumbo was bigger than Bruce Smith, and he rolled him so many times in the run game that he tired him out. So you need to get Neal to keep going forward and dominating the defensive ends. So once you do that, he'll get the confidence, and then pass protection will be a lot easier. That's what they need to do. When you have these big guys, let them do what they do best. Inertia, go forward.
Is is Kayvon gonna live up to some of his hype, even though some of it is self-created? Because again, a big personality will create its own. He speaks his mind, very intelligent. He's very thoughtful, and I don't think he speaks ridiculously. He speaks with purpose and intent. He's very eloquent, I would say. But is he creating a little bit of a issue for himself in this market?
No, a lot of if you produce, no one really cares what you have to say.
Sure.
He just needs to produce. Him and Ojolari, they have to, get the numbers. They have to get to the quarterback. If they do that, nobody will care what they say. Believe
Is
me.
Is this potentially one of the deepest and best defensive lines this team has had in a while? I
Yeah.
think I can't say, but definitely, can't go back to the exact time when it was potentially better. You have to go back when JPP was still here in his prime a little bit, and Tuck was so somewhere close to 8 years.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a great line, with the Kiwanuka, Umanura, Tuck, JPP, they had Strahan before that. But that was a 4-man line. It was a different composition. And this is a 3-man line, and you need to have some bigger guys. Uh, you definitely need a run stopper in the middle. Lawrence, the Giants had a terrible season against the run. Lawrence was in the middle for most of that. So even though he's a Pro Bowler and an All Pro, whatever, he's got to be a better run stopper. And I think that's why they got Nacho and Riley and these other guys, because they're going to rotate those guys in. Lawrence can push the pocket, dominate the line of scrimmage, but the run game, they've got to stop the run. Leonard Williams is still a good player. Ashawn Robinson still has gas in the tank. So I think it'll be a good front. It'll be a good front.
Do you foresee Leonard Williams back here next season, regardless of how his season goes? Can you foresee him still being on this team going forward?
Hard to tell. I thought he would be forced to take a salary cut this year. They didn't touch his $32 million cap hit. They didn't touch any of that. So I think that they're going to sunset him, because if they had to redo his contract, they would have had to add years, and I think that's why they didn't do that. So it's funny you should ask me that, because I've been saying that he's on his way out. Rather than extend him, I think they're just going to let him go.
Right. It seems that way. And it's not as if he's old at all. He just came in very, very young. So he's got plenty of, NFL experience behind him. Still would be considered in his prime years as an athlete.
Right.
But off of that 32, he's probably going to want a significant amount of money too. Nobody plays this game for free. And how much can you potentially invest in your defensive line when I think Ojulari's contract's going to be coming up? These guys are going to start rotating. Money's going to be coming up really, really quickly. So I'm with you. I don't know if Leonard Williams makes it back next year, and I hope he has a great one. What do you make of now Adoree moving into the slot? That concerns me a little bit, just because he hasn't played full-time. He's taken a handful of snaps here and there. I'm a little bit concerned about taking a guy out of position and then just saying, hey, go live here for the season. I think he's capable, but does that give you concern?
No. He's not a very big corner. And, wide receivers in this league are getting bigger and bigger. So taking him off the edge and putting him in the slot, I think you're playing to his attributes. You're playing to his talents.
Sure, speed and size a little bit easier to handle at that point, maybe.
Yeah, I think he could handle the slot. When he was in Tennessee, he struggled a little bit. They actually, cut him, rather than pay him $8 million. So the Giants went and paid him $13 million for some odd reason I don't know.
Oh, we know the reason. It's because same reason.
Did it,
yeah, same reason for a lot of things.
But he's a fast guy, and he could cover the slot, and I think that's a good place for him. And if they need him, he can bump back outside. So,
do you again contract here for him too? Is he foreseeably on his way out as well? Especially now, if you hit on your two young corners.
Well, it all depends. How much is it going to cost? Is it going to cost you to keep him?
Sure.
If he's still pretty young, also. Same thing with Leonard Williams. If he comes back and says, "Look, I don't want to move out of New Jersey," I want to come back to the Giants, sort of like Sterling Shepard did.
Sure.
And he'll take a team friendly deal.
What do you make of Sterling Shepard? What an interesting career. The guy gets hurt as quickly as he recovers. He seems to he's an absolute cult fan favorite. Fans would put him in the Ring of Honor today because of his effort and his passion, right? We can fans can identify at least that aspect of it. What do you make of his career and his trajectory, and what's his NFL afterlife?
Well, he wants to be a Giant. So, somebody was writing an article about he's going to be traded. I'm like, what are you, out of your mind? This guy would not play for another team. He's had concussions. He's had ACL. He's had Achilles. He's not going to move. He's living in New Jersey now, like Leonard Williams. They want to stay here. You saw Darnay Holmes take a pay cut just to stay with the Giants. They could have cut him, and he would have been picked up. But he wanted to stay here. Same thing with Shepard. He's had a good career. Probably, the injuries have hurt him naturally.
Sure.
Uh, he's never really had great numbers, but he's really a number three. So number three is a number three, and
Sure.
hopefully he can remain a number three with the Giants. I think he still has life in his legs. He's going to help the team.
Where were you on this whole Daniel Jones journey, right? You've been here obviously since inception. It happened in 19. You
Yeah.
get the whole playoff win last season. Where were you in that world as you're just going through this grind of watching him every season? Where were you on it from, beginning to now at least?
Well, I was against him drafting him with the sixth pick.
Yeah.
I thought it was a colossal error. They had 2 first-round picks. If they would have drafted Dexter Lawrence sixth and Jones 17th, that would have made more sense when you think about it. But they didn't. Gettleman fell in love with Jones and drafted him with the sixth pick. And the guy just didn't have the mojo. I think that he reminded the Maras of Eli Manning, his personality-wise. That's why they liked him so much. But as it turns out, he played his best under Pat Shermer as a rookie. And then, of course, he just injuries and all the coordinator changes and coaches changes. They really never gave him a chance. And now that he's got good coaches around him, he's going to be a good player. I mean, top 10, maybe 10th in the league. That's not bad. I'll take it.
You can win a Super Bowl with that. You absolutely have the ability to. Now, will you? Different conversation, but it puts you
Yeah.
at least in the conversation or the ability to, because that means you should probably be sniffing playoffs and get into that scenario.
Yeah.
Now, with Daniel Jones, the Vikings game, the playoff game, did you expect that kind of performance from him?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I expect him to be a combination of what his coaches have coached in the past, and that's Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. Kafka, he pretty much made Coach Mahomes, and made him what he is, gave him the license to do what he does. Mahomes has the talent, but he could have been a wild bust too. Same thing with Allen. I mean, he's still wild when you think about it. He flies by the seat of his pants. So with Dable and Kafka, they've got a hold of Jones. He's got a little bit of both of those guys in him. So I expect him to play like a top 5 quarterback. And he runs. He's a very good runner. He's not that fast, but he knows how to get past people, and he knows when to run. So and his arm is better than people think. His deep ball is beautiful. He's one of the best deep passers in the league. They just never gave him the opportunity. Now he's got a couple of guys that can get downfield, take a top off a defense. We'll see what he can do. I think his numbers will be very good this year.
What do you make of the pick of Jalen Hyatt? Now, obviously, there's a lot of hype. We've seen the videos. You got the Cowboys coach telling him he's strictly just a 9-go route kind of guy, and there's nothing else he can do, and that's why he's here. He's looked pretty good on tape. How do you see him being deployed, and what were your thoughts when that pick was made?
Well, the Cowboys receivers coach that you're referring to.
Correct.
In a video, he told him he'd be nothing more than a deep threat.
Sure.
That's because at Tennessee, that's all he really was.
Yep.
I mean, and then, the combine, whatever. You see how fast he is. And that's probably what he does best, the fly route. But he can also, catch balls underneath. We saw a little finesse. He can run some routes. Like I said, it's about targets. How often will they target him? Waller is going to want the ball. Barkley's going to want. There's only one football.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then you got Slayton. Jones loves Slayton. He's been his best receiver since he's been here. Paris Campbell's another guy you got to get the ball to. So it all depends on his. And you talked about Sterling Shepard.
Sure. And we haven't even mentioned Isaiah Hodgins potentially full year outside.
I keep forgetting about Hodgins.
Yeah. Isaiah Hodgins is what Kenny Golladay could have been had he played better and not been hurt. Another guy who obviously can't.
Right.
Doesn't look right.
He actually looks a little bit like Golladay, but I think he gets better separation.
He knows how to get open. He absolutely knows how to get open, find soft zones.
Yeah. Galladay was the kind of guy who fought for the football, and then when he got to the Giants, he forgot how to do that.
What happened with that? Besides the god awful contract given to him that nobody probably asked for,
Mm.
what happened with that whole thing?
Well, I believe he had a back injury that really kind of limited him. He couldn't do what he used to do. Uh, and the Giants' offense, they were calling for him to run short patterns. He had his back to the defense a lot. So when you have your back to your defense a lot and you have a back injury, you're going to get hit in the back, and that becomes a mental problem. Dropping passes and not, shying away and stuff like that. So I think that's what happened to him, and he completely lost it.
Which contract was worse, Kenny Galladay or Nate Solder?
Oh, the Galladay contract, yeah.
Easily, right? Because at least Nate Solder gave you something.
Yeah, Nate Solder, he was never a Pro Bowl player, but
Sure.
he was a serviceable tackle. He was way overpaid, but he didn't play poorly. He played poorly at times, but most of the time he played okay.
Yeah.
You're right. He gave you something.
He gave you something. I mean, I feel like Kenny Galladay gave you nothing. And again, I have no internal information to say otherwise on Kenny Galladay. We just look at what we see, and it didn't look good whatsoever at all. And how much of that was injury? More importantly, why we ended up giving 4 years, $64 million when it seems like nobody else who was really ponying up that much.
You kind of bid against yourself there, and that wasn't very wise.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen anymore under Joe Shane. He's a little more tuned in.
No, absolutely.
Tuned in.
So what's gonna what's gonna go on with Saquon now? Right, he's on the tag. He's here. He's gonna play this year out. Do you
Well, he's
foresee?
not on the tag. That's the thing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah,
Do you
he's on
foresee
a
him back
contract.
long term?
No, they won't do it. They'll do the same thing next year as they did this year. If he has a monster season, he has a monster season. They're not going to pay him multi-year deal. If anything, he might get 2 years, but I don't even see that.
So, what is your expectation? They're gonna tag him. They're probably not gonna come to an agreement because he's gonna want a lot more than they're willing to give. Does he actually hold out this time? Does he say, "All right, man, I'm not doing this again like I did last year"?
He doesn't have a lot of leverage. All right. The running back position, I mean, the air came out of the bubble. You saw guys. Ezekiel Elliott got cut. He got signed for what, $6 million for 1 year with New England. Dalvin Cook with the Jets, $6-7 million. That's where the market is for those guys. He's lucky he's getting the 11 million. Josh Jacobs is a little younger, but he's also lucky. And look who's giving it to him. The Raiders. They really don't know what the hell they're doing anyway. But
Sure.
But he didn't get a whole lot more than Barkley did. And Pollard, yeah, he got about whatever. I forget what they signed him for, but it wasn't much.
Sure.
It wasn't much more than the tag.
What do you make of this, in your opinion? What do you do when you're in this position? You have a guy like Barkley who's obviously not a scrub by any means and measure, and you want to keep him on the team. There's obviously this whole market thing. There's this chess game going on. How do you come to a resolution? Is there a resolution?
No. The game is changing. Look at the teams that win. They're all running back by committee teams. Philadelphia, Kansas City, right? Buffalo. I mean, these teams, they don't have bell cow backs anymore. You're not going to dedicate a lot of money to that position, especially to one guy. It does. You don't need, to have a Saquon Barkley to win the Super Bowl. The Chiefs won last year. The top back was Isaiah Pacheco, a 7th-round pick out of Rutgers.
Yeah, from New Jersey.
Right, and look what the Eagles did. Their top runner was Miles Sanders, and they let him go to free agency and traded for DeAndre Swift. So, to them, it's a revolving door. They need 3-4 guys. That's how it works. The Giants feel the same way. You got Shane from Buffalo, Brandon Brown, right? He's from Philadelphia. That's the mindset. Dable's from Buffalo. Those are the teams you're dealing with. Think about what those teams were doing.
Sure,
And
and
that's
they're
what
looking to
the
follow
Giants
the same kind of process.
Giants are headed for no number one wide receiver, no number one running back, you know, revolving door of players. Put your money in the big guys, put your money in the quarterback, the pass rusher. That's what they'll be doing.
Yeah. What do you make of fans who believe that people who work for the Giants, cover media, aren't as objective as they should be? Are there too many people who work for the Giants who are a little bit too biased, which is probably natural, right? You work for an
I
employer,
work,
you can
work
naturally defend them. Is there enough objectivity between Giants beat writers?
well, I was in the Giants people for a few years. I'll tell you, most of them aren't even Giant fans. I mean,
Who-
I'll tell you
who-
who's a Giant fan. Paul Dottino's a Giant fan, and he also works for the Giants.
Yes,
Okay. I was a Giant fan. I worked for NBC and SNY. Everybody knew that. Okay. But I was more objective than Paul. Paul was getting paid by the Giants.
right.
I don't get paid by the Giants. Okay. Then you have guys like Paul Schwartz, who have been doing it forever, Tom Rock. Those guys, I think they're Giants fans, but they have to maintain a level of objectivity. And a lot of the younger guys coming in are not Giant fans. Okay. You have Dan Duggan, Jordan Renan, all these guys. They're all from all over the place. They work for Jersey. Most of them are probably Eagle fans. I see more Eagles fans covering the Giants than Giant fans. So there is objectivity there. As a matter of fact, they're even less objective. They're anti-Giant sometimes.
Which comes across pretty clearly at times, which is why I asked, like somebody who probably has met individuals or been in those kind of rooms. When you're covering a certain team, it comes across a certain way to fans too, where fans will say to fans, this person might hate the team. Like it seems like you hate the team, but you cover the team.
Right. Yeah, you can't be like that. I mean, over time, you become a professional. You kind of leave your fandom at the door, and you do your job.
Sure.
I mean, I've covered other sports, teams that I don't necessarily root for or whatever, right? I covered them objectively.
Yeah.
You know? So I had no issues with that. I mean, that's what they should do also. I think
Um,
it's having some of the new guys that come in, they get kind of overwhelmed, and they really don't know their job that well, and they don't write from an objective standpoint. But they do have editors, so editors could say, "Look, this is unacceptable. We can't take this."
sure.
That's
Fair enough. You have to be higher up on the tree, um, probably to make those decisions. One would assume someone like Patricia Traina has a little bit more say in what she puts out, or a
right.
Paul Dottino has a little bit more say, just because they're at the top of their food chain, respectively speaking. So it really becomes, is it the editor? Is it them?
Right. Well, Patty Trainer is a Giant fan. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah,
And she was working for a lot of independent outfits. There was one, I think it was Inside Giants or something. And it was a newsletter started by this guy. I think his name was Dave Klein. I think it was Dave Klein. And she was working for them for a long time. I'm not sure if that's it, but that could be it.
sure.
Then you have the Giant Insider, which I wrote for a while, Jerry Foley's outfit. He's got a beat writer, Chris Bezignano. They do a podcast, which I helped them launch. But they're all Giant fans. You know, they make no bones about it.
Oh no, not at all. Which I think Giants fans admire and love about that, because there's a relatable aspect. In that case, and you just mentioned it, you help the Giants Insiders podcast. Speak a
Mhm.
little bit to the fact that you're a little bit of a godfather and OG here when we talk about this, right? Go back to inception of currently what's going on and where were you in that kind of ground up scenario.
Oh well, when I started, I mean, it was all print and TV. There was no electronic media. All right, so when I tried to get in the door, Pat Hanlon, who was running he still runs the Giants communication department, said, "Hey, you're not affiliated with a major outfit. I can't. I'm not going to give you a credential." I said, "How about a couple of daily credentials? and we kind of came to an agreement. And then there was another guy who ran Big Blue View. He still does, Ed Valentine. Uh, he kind of came in the door with me, and we kind of started that ball rolling where it was the alternative media was getting credentialed. But we got lucky. I mean, my blog was bought by SNY TV. So now I was part of NBC Comcast SNY. So I was right in the door. They had no problem with that. Ed's was bought by, he worked for Big Blue View. They were bought by Turner or whatever it was. And, he became a beat writer, so most of the other guys had a rough time. If they maintained independent blogs or websites, it took a long time for them to get credentialed. But now content creators like you guys, there's a few of you out there that do it very well. The Giants see this and they say, hey, these guys, put a positive spin on things and they'll give you, a seat at the table. But, because, the media is changing.
Sure.
Newspapers, nobody reads a newspaper anymore. Back when I started, everything was in the newspaper. Even Dan, when we started USA Today, his articles were going into the USA Today newspaper. I haven't seen a USA Today hard copy newspaper in 10 years. When you think about it, So, and Dan actually had worked for me, with me as a writer at SNY, and then he spun off his own blog, Giants 101. I don't know if you remember that one. And I worked with him on that for a while, and I've been cross posting with a whole bunch of people over the years, jumping back and forth, and now I'm back with USA Today. But to me, it's just all about the work. The outfit that you're with doesn't really matter. And the Giants, we're not credentialed to be at the stadium or at practice. I mean, of course, I could go. I just call them and tell them I'm coming. But USA Today and a lot of these other outfits feel it's more beneficial for us to cover from afar and use the social media tools, right? And the things that the teams give us remotely to cover the team. Saves on travel, saves on wear and tear. A lot of people don't understand being a beat writer on location is a very tedious job. There's just too much downtime. And the travel as well. I mean, you're wasting a lot of time.
So walk us through that a little bit. What is that lifestyle? What's a day like for somebody who's a beat writer?
Well, let's say you're a beat writer for the Giants. You show up to the facility, probably, when you can get there, but usually an hour, depends on the media schedule, maybe an hour before things kick off. And, you wait, you watch practice, or you watch the portion they allow you to watch. You can't watch the whole practice. And then you're in the media room working. And then when there's interviews, you go out and do the interviews. So that could be spaced out through like 7-8 hour day, with a lot of downtime in between. Brian Dable talks for 15 minutes. That's it. Then you don't see anybody for 2 hours. Then you get lunch or whatever, and practice starts. Then after practice, you talk to the players. They only allow a certain amount of players to speak to the media every day. They don't allow everybody. They don't make everybody available. They only make a few. So, it's everybody kind of gets the same thing unless you request an exclusive. Tell Pat Hanlon or one of his people, look, I want to talk to, Isaiah Hodgins, let's say, or somebody like that. And I'll say, okay, we'll make him available. And there'll be a one-on-one, and then somebody will hear about it, and then there'll be a whole bunch of you talking to the guy, and you don't get that exclusive anymore. But
sure,
yeah, that's what used to happen. So it's a long day. It's not glamorous. The pay isn't great, and having access to the team and being an insider is fun, but after a while you're like, Okay, what do I do now?
Fair.
We were
Who
looking
was
for the next steps.
who was your favorite player interaction when while covering the team, and who was probably, I don't want to say the worst, but your least favorite interactive player?
Well, all of the players, I never really had a bad interaction. I'll tell you why. Because I wasn't a young guy when I started this. I was 40ish, almost 40. So, they looked at me, even though I was new to it. The players probably figured, oh, well, this guy's been around. So I had a little respect. Um, I think, Eli was very nice. He was always receptive. Answered Didn't answer the questions that you posed to him a lot, but he did talk, Michael Strahan and those guys. Uh, Matthias Kiwanuka, I remember him. He was very he was well educated. Uh, his grandfather, I think, was the president of Uganda, and he was educated. His family came from Uganda, and he was educated at Boston College. He was a good interview. Um, Tiki
I actually
Bar.
did get to talk to Matthias Kiwanuka a few months ago. Like I said, very, very honest, open guy. Great guy to talk to.
Yeah, he's a smart guy. Tiki was always good. Going back, Phil McConkey. Ooh, he was a good interview. Sims, of course. Sims kind of interviews you when you talk to him. He knows a lot, and he's been through a lot, and he's not afraid to say it. I was when they replaced him on TV with Tony Romo. I didn't like that at all. Tony Romo to me isn't bad. Everybody thinks he's great. I don't think he's so hot. I like Sims better.
When Shockey was in town, what was that like? I mean, there was so much hype, so much. I love that response right there as the head goes down. What was the Shockey era like, or the time there?
They treated him with kid gloves, meaning they gave him special treatment because they didn't know how to handle him. He wasn't a mature individual at all. He was like a man child, and great player, one of the best talents they had in the building in their 100 years here. But he fizzed out. I mean, it was no brain, no pain, and he had some injuries. Then he had a big argument with Jerry Reese, and they traded him to New Orleans after that.
Did he alienate himself? Like, what was really happening there? Because he's still on the Super Bowl, right? The guy's on the roster. He's not even on the sideline. He's nowhere to be found, sitting in his own box, right? What was happening there?
Right, he had a broken leg.
Yep.
Yeah, and he was in one of the suites partying with people. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's typical Shockey. He kind of didn't take. Bavaro was didn't want to work with him after a while because he wasn't taking his profession seriously. And Bavaro was all business. If you ever deal with him, he's a straightforward guy. He thought Shockey was great. He was right. Shockey was great, but Shockey didn't become as great as he could have become.
Sure.
Because his own behavior. He was kind of like Dwight Gooden was with the Mets. If you remember, he just got himself and wasn't good to himself.
Sure, fair enough. Was there an impact of being in this area? Was that
Oh yeah,
detrimental? Obviously, being where you physically are.
Yeah, he was not ready for the big time, and he liked to party, and he liked to be Jeremy Shockey, and that was it. He learned. You could tell, after later in his career, he won a Super Bowl with the Saints.
Yep.
And I think he was with Carolina. You could tell he knew it was the end, and you could see it in his face, like, man, I screwed this up.
Because it could have been a better career. Could have been a better career.
He knew it was over. He was like, I F this up. You could
Yeah.
just see it in his face.
Who's the biggest what if player you can think of that if they either, walked down the right path as a Giant or did something a little bit differently, they would have had a much better career? Is there a player that kind of sticks out in your head as a what if? And I'm not talking injury based, not like a David Wilson. I'm talking about a player who probably just made some bad choices.
The biggest what if of any Giant, and this goes, a lot of people will tell you, is Tiki Barber retiring when he did.
Hmm.
Because he has one more year. He not only wins the Super Bowl, he gets enough stats to go into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, he's about 1 year, at the trajectory he was on. If he had one more year like that, I'm with you 100%. He's a Hall of Famer, and he's off by that 1 year right now.
And he has that Super Bowl ring.
Yeah, but I don't know. Do they win the Super Bowl if he's still on that roster? Who
Well,
knows?
I don't know, but
Yeah.
it's a different team with him. You're right.
Is that a bigger what if than the Plaxico incident?
That's another what if, sure.
Well,
Yeah, that's another what if that the Plaxico incident blew that season apart. It shouldn't have, but it did. They just did not play well after that. I mean, you saw what happened. Then they played Philadelphia in the playoffs,
yeah, it was ugly.
and it was not a good scene at all. They weren't even competitive in that game.
Yeah. Did that Plaxico incident obviously cause a much bigger ripple than anyone expected, potentially?
Yeah, the way it wasn't handled well, and Coughlin did his best to try to mitigate it, but the Giants didn't know what to do. When did they ever have an incident like that? Never.
Well,
They have an incident like that, and multiple players were involved. Antonio Pierce was involved. Ahmad Bradshaw was involved. So, and there was police investigation after investigation. The guy
depositions, court dates.
Yeah, the guy shoots himself.
Yeah.
That's an insult, and then they had insult to injury. They put him in jail for a year.
Yeah, unreal, but it definitely did happen. Is there? Actually, who is? And again, this goes from your childhood forward. Who's your favorite Giant player? Just as a fan, when you're a fan of the team, who was your guy?
Who's my favorite player of all time?
Yeah,
People would say Lawrence Taylor, but that's too easy.
sure.
He's the greatest player, maybe ever, anywhere, for any team. There's never been anybody like him before or since. So he's like the Wayne Gretzky, the Michael Jordan, Ruth. He's just means that much to football. Some people say that's crazy, but some people say no, you're right. He's definitely one of the top 5 players of all time. But one of my favorite players was a linebacker back in the 70s and early 80s, Brad Van Pelt.
Yes.
The guy was solid. I mean, he was just a great player, great athlete. He was a safety coming out of Michigan State. They actually drafted him with one of the picks they got back from Minnesota when they traded Fran Tarkenton away. And they had him at safety. And he was 6'5". I mean, he was a tall, lanky guy. He was a multi-sport athlete. And he really didn't have a position. And then the Giants had a linebacker coach, you may have heard of him, Marty Schottenheimer. He was the Giants linebacker coach. And he said, you know what? He told the head coach, who I think at the time was, I forget who it was, in the mid-'70s. It wasn't McVay. It was before. Oh, Bill Onsparger. And he said, let's make him a linebacker. He said, I could do it. And they made him an outside linebacker. And he played next to Harry Carson. And on the other side of Carson was a guy by the name of Brian Kelly, who was another one of my favorite players. He was a very good linebacker as well. That was the pre-LT days.
Sure.
Giants had a great defense, no offense. So that's when they first got to Jersey. It was you drive over there to watch them lose, 16-13.
Oh, man. Well, hopefully we're trending back to being a solid defense or a great defense and a great offense. Things are at least trending up. Which free agent acquisition makes the bigger impact? Okereke or Waller? I'm not going to call obviously Waller free agent, but acquisition, which
Oh,
okay, is actually the free agent. But which player makes the bigger impact?
well, I think Waller. Well, it's close.
Yeah.
I think Waller will make the bigger impact because he creates a mismatch on offense. I mean, when he's on the field, the defense has to have at least three eyeballs on him. You can't cover him one on one, so you're going to have help on him, and that's going to open up a lot of things.
When you watched that first preseason drive and all they did was feed Waller very intentionally, very purposely, and
Yeah,
nobody could do anything,
yeah.
and that drive just goes down for a touchdown. What are your thoughts there? Because the whole world was losing it as Giants fans, like, wow, this is might be an actual thing. Was that obviously a little bit too much, obviously, an overreaction, or will it be something along that boat that he really can be that kind of a weapon?
No, he's as good as any tight end in the league. He's not really a tight end. He's like a wide receiver who's as big as a tight end. Travis Kelsey, a lot of people, oh, he's a great tight end. He doesn't play tight end. Does he
Yeah.
line up in line? No, he's always split out. You move him all over the place. Same thing with Waller. Mark Andrews does the same thing. Kittle blocks a little bit, but most of the time he's going out for passes. So
Sure.
Waller is that kind of a guy.
And that's where you have, like you said, Kafka brings that experience from that
Yeah,
with Kelsey.
again, you're hitting the nail on the head.
Yeah, and then
Waller equals
there you go.
Kelsey.
There you go. And then Dayball had both Gronk and the other guy. So they have enough experience where now the Giants 12 personnel potentially has a chance to be, you know, excellent because I'm a personal big fan of Daniel Bellinger. I think he's a very good complete tight end who will be a good complement. And then, like you said, Waller is just going to be a weapon, regardless of what title you want to put. He's a weapon.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's definitely a guy that they are going to look to exploit defenses with. He's that kind of a guy. And the same thing with Hyatt and Hodgins, and of course their best receiver always has been Saquon Barkley. Out
Yeah,
of the back.
they didn't use Saquon in the passing game as much last season, which I found a little bit surprising. Do you think that was intentional? Was there something stopping them from doing that?
That's not their game plan. And they really should incorporate him in the passing game a little more. I think they wanted to, but they just didn't know how to do it. You know.
Yeah, a little bit of case of the he had a little case of the dropsies last season as well, which is
Yeah, but that's to be expected.
sure.
If you look at his rookie year, the way he caught the ball out of the backfield when Pat Shermer was calling the plays, was it Shermer? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's when he went for 80 plus receptions, I think, right? 80 something. It was,
91.
yeah, there you go.
And that was a great year for him. And I think that I don't know if they'll get back to that, but they could get him up to 60s. That'd be great.
Just a little bit more of a threat would be nice, right? All it does is put the opposing defense more on their heels when you can do something like that.
When you have the defense backpedaling, you've won.
Absolutely, 100%. We have a question about: did you ever go to the vet, and what was Veteran Stadium like as a beat writer?
I never went as on the job, but I went as a fan. I went with my brother. It was the 88. I think the Giants, had Carl Banks. I think it was the game where Carl Banks had Randall Cunningham sacked, and he got out of it and threw a touchdown. I think that was the game.
Yeah.
But we didn't wear any Giants stuff, okay, because we knew, you wear opposing colors, you're going to get into a brawl. And my brother and I didn't feel like doing that, so we just wore like our leather jackets, and we went and enjoyed the game, even though the Giants lost. And then we went out in Philly. We had some cheesesteaks and stuff. But I know people that have gone to Philly. One guy was a friend of mine. He was a big Dallas fan. And as soon as he walked up to the gate to go in with the Cowboy, I think had an Aikman jersey on. They said, "You can't wear that in here." And he says, "What are you talking about?" He says, "No, we're not going to let you in with that jersey on, with that Cowboy jersey." And he thought, hey, they're prejudiced against Cowboy fans. I said, no. I said, why they didn't want you to wear it? They were protecting you.
Sure.
Okay, because you were going to get into trouble with that jersey. So it was a zoo. The fans are, I don't want to call them animals, but,
let's keep it real here. All right.
Rowdy. I mean, it just get too rowdy.
I'm very honest about the people of Philadelphia and how they are collectively. And again, I'm obviously generalizing, but they are excessive to say the least when it comes to fandom.
Yeah, well, they have a passion, but there's a line.
Yeah, there you go. So they definitely know how to cross those lines. Um, the Giants have had so many heartbreaking moments in their franchise, as many as great ones. What's the heartbreaking moment that just sticks in your memory bank worse than anything else? And you say, you know what, that's just the one.
Well, I don't want to talk about the Deshaun Jackson. I
It's
was in
always Matt
I was in
Dodge.
the
It's
press
always
box.
yeah, it's always Matt Dodge. That's the answer. Nobody likes Matt Dodge. There's a reason for it.
Well, no, I don't particularly blame Matt Dodge. I mean, there was a lot that went on in that game, but he didn't help. Uh, but I think the biggest disappointment was Super Bowl 35. Uh, they didn't play. They didn't even show up.
You're the first
Got-
person, and you're the first person I want to call you out and thank you for that. I am the only person I know when they bring up the worst Giants memories, I always bring up how they got rocked in that Super Bowl and how heartbroken
Yeah,
and disappointed I was that it felt like they weren't even there. I mean, granted, that Ravens team was a juggernaut, no problem, but we didn't even compete after destroying Minnesota like that. There wasn't even a competition.
yeah. It was a very disappointing, deflating moment to get to that game and just be a no-show. I think because of that game, Jim Fossil, rest his soul, never got another chance to be a head coach. That's the reason why he did not prepare his team for that game.
Now you got to see all the different coaches for a good time span, both as a fan and covering it.
Yeah.
Which coach was your favorite coach to interact with or deal with per se, and which coach was um, why are you here coach? Like for me, the why are you here coach was definitely Ben McAdoo. That one,
Right.
even at that higher, it was like what's happening here.
Right.
I don't care if you work with Aaron Rodgers for a year, good for you, but
Yeah,
or
he
two
did.
years. But who are those coaches for you?
Well, I wasn't covering the team when Paul Sills was the coach, but I did interview him a couple of times, and he was always my favorite coach because he was a no nonsense guy. He was a bottom line guy. Tom Coughlin too. But Tom Coughlin, you know, was coaching in the 21st century. He had to change his ways. Parcells never would have done that. Parcells would have said, "No, you listen to what I say. You do it my way. I don't care what the norms of society are doing right now."
Sure.
Yeah, but Coughlin had to change, and I think once he changed, he won a little bit, but he just felt like a fish out of water after a while. Ray Handley was probably the worst coach they had. He should not have been the head coach when Parcells left. They should have given it to Belichick, but George Young didn't want to do that. Uh, we don't know the reasons why. There's probably somebody out there who can tell you that. Um, oh, before that, in the '70s, they had Alex Webster. Well, Ali Sherman was the first coach in the '60s. Uh, he set the Giants on a big tailspin. And then Alex Webster had a couple of winning seasons, but then the '70s were just a blur. Bill Onsparger came in. He was the guy who ran Don Shula's defense in Miami when they had the undefeated season. But he wasn't a head coaching material. And then when he was fired, John McVay came in. That's Sean McVay's grandfather.
Yep.
Then they had the fumble game. He got canned. And then they brought in Ray Perkins, and he didn't want to stay. He was a good coach, but he didn't want to stay. He went back to Alabama, where he succeeded Bear Bryant as Alabama's coach. And then Parcells got the job, and you know the rest.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got people saying things like, I heard Hanley lives in the middle of nowhere and will not admit to anyone that he was the Giants coach. So maybe Hanley's gone into an obscure corner somewhere and just pretends
Well,
like that part of his life never existed.
he did. He never coached again after the Giants fired him. He was out of football, and that was very odd.
No.
He doesn't take interviews, so no one really knows what he's up to.
So maybe that would be right. When when you sit back and look at your career arc from covering, and again, you're still active, it's not like it's over, but covering to today, what's the best way you can sum up your journey as a um, I don't want to call you a writer, but an all-encompassing giant insider?
Oh, okay. Um, it's about what if you want to do something in life, you can do it. I tell people that I was a vice president in a Fortune 500 company, and I switched careers because I saw what was going on in the industry. Decided to become a journalist. I said, well, what? Maybe I'll do sports. So I decided writing about football. I had a Mets website called Happy Recap, which the Mets made me close down. I don't know why, but maybe because of all the negativity in the '90s when the internet was fresh. Nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew how to make money off it. Nobody knew anything. Uh, and then getting into football, and then I decided to cover the Giants. And then once I got into like the beat role, um, it's it's just it goes fast. Every year comes around. It's like, do I want to do this? And the answer, as soon as you see NFL Network, they show a game, it's like, all right, I got to do it this year again.
Yeah.
So I told Dan this might be my last year, but we'll see. Next year might come along. I'll say, yeah, I'm bored. Let me go back and do it again.
Yeah, I got to ask Dan how many times you told him this might be your last year. We'll see what Dan has to say.
This is the second last year in a row.
Second last year, okay.
Next year will be the third.
So maybe we'll get a little bit closer, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. John, I want to thank you so much for, again, taking your time out, spending this time with us, for people who are here. Again, genuinely appreciate everything you've done. Continue to contribute, and just looking forward to interacting with you again throughout the season. Maybe get you back on and talk a little bit more and just see how the developments go for us. More importantly, hopefully we get that first week one win. That's a big game. I'm excited for it, but I want to thank you and I appreciate you. If you want to just tell everybody where they can catch you, obviously Giants Wire, that's your Twitter handle is your @ you can see right there on the screen. So
correct, yeah. I want to thank you for having me on, and I also run a fantasy football and betting newsletter called Fennelly on Football. It usually runs through that Twitter handle that you have right there, so people can look on there and they can read my newsletter, and I actually do pretty well. So put it to you this way: I don't really have to work that hard anymore.
I will be submitting an application soon, and you will find work for me. So, John, appreciate you. I'm going to stop here because I was told I didn't ask a question. I was asked about, because people already know you're somewhat in the gambling world or in the betting world. How about some tips here right before you go? What's one tip you can give to an amateur or a pro about the gambling world?
Well, if you're going to be, don't be a fan of a team or a player, be a fan of money. Okay. Just think about the money. Just put your fandom in your back pocket, like I always say, and just look at the stats, follow the numbers, and that's where you put your money. Don't be a fan. Don't like or dislike. Just say, this is the best chance I have to win, and that's where you put your money.
There you go.
Don't your own team if you have to, but
like most things in life, be a little bit more sensical than emotional, and you'll probably have a good output.
Suck the emotion right out of it, and you'll be fine. It's not as fun, but
it'll be fun when that money rolls around.
That's correct.
All right, John, I appreciate it so much. Thank you, and have a great evening.
You too. Thanks again, Zain.
I appreciate it.